Good morning, everyone from near and far. Today we will be discussing about your views and your inputs and your impression that you have throughout the discussion for the past 2 days. So our wrap-up session will be about 2 hours long. So the first hour will just be you sharing your thoughts. And then the last hour would be to focus on coming up with the written memorandum itself to be presented by Matthew in the next session with the PECC members. So with this, I would like to pass the floor to Matthew to lead the discussion. Thank you, Matthew.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. I hope that you have enjoyed the last couple of days as much as I have. I found the discussions really rich. There was certainly a lot there. I thought that maybe we could kick off the discussion by starting to put together some of our general impressions of some of the important themes that came out of the 2 days. I know that we already started doing this, some of us on the LinkedIn group page. And so maybe as a first step, I wonder whether people would be willing to get into, well, maybe we could just start together with some general reflections using the raise hand button. And I think, a lot of us had perhaps questions that we would have liked to have asked, but weren't able to, or maybe even sometimes where we did ask questions but didn't feel they were answered. So this could be an opportunity to kind of bring those back up. So if I could get you to use the raise hand function in the participants menu, and then we can start gathering a few impressions that way. Yes, so a little hard with all of our coded names now to know who's talking, but I think Sonia's hand raised.
Yes, hi. Yeah, it's pretty hard to talk about this because there were so many different big topics, and all of them really interesting and highly relevant, obviously. I'll talk about two things that I think were really important to me. The first one was the education piece, and for me, I was, I guess, wanting something a bit more a bit more direct in terms of, we know that there's a problem with like female participation in the workforce after graduation or education and training. We know that there is a problem that employers feel that their people are not ready for the workplace, and the speakers were saying how the face of education is changing with digital like online learning coming into fore, and the degrees for life no longer being the case. So I was, I guess, anticipating something along the lines of our experts saying, and I don't know if this is just me with my background, saying that governments should be really encouraging, and if not making mandatory, a link between business and I guess the real world and academia, or just education. And I think also that the discussions around education were still very university centric. A lot of people do not go to university, and I think it's very narrowing for us to only talk about it in that sense. So I think if we were to, as a group, talk about how we need to ensure that it's not just about university, it's about primary school, intermediate school, and that there being a link with the real world. I think that's really important and something for the person after me to discuss. But my second thing is everyone agrees it's really important that climate change action is undertaken, but there isn't it's not integrated into every approach. So for example, when we talk about SMEs and digitalization, that should be talked about in terms of sustainable business. When we talk about education, that should be talked about also with the lens of sustainable business and moving to a sustainable economy and world. It should really be permeating through every other large topic. Those are my few observations, and I know that those are only two things when we covered a really wide range of topics, but I'm interested to hear from the rest of my colleagues.
Thanks. I think that was a really good start to the conversation. So what I'm hearing is, on the one hand, a more sort of joined up set of thoughts around education, including scaffolding, people's links all the way through from primary through to the workplace, and in particular more of an emphasis on women in work and the gendered and continued gendered implications of current educational structures. And then I think, yeah, point well taken on climate change, that needs to permeate everything rather than being perhaps a standalone topic. Awesome, thank you. So next is Tumin. Sorry, I'm using your last names from the coded thing.
Okay, it's fine. Hello, everyone. So I definitely agree with Sonia, and I think, Rose. I also wanted to add that I think on the employment topic, it rightly so focused a lot on youth, which is an important issue in itself. But I think the general discussion on the effects or long-term effects of unemployment wasn't really that heavily discussed as well. And I think this would also pertain to not only women, but say much older workers, nearing their retirement age, for example. They are also one of the workers who were let go when the whole pandemic started, just because it's easier to let them go. And I think this has implications in terms of like how different countries manage their aging population. So from that angle, I think there needs to be a little bit more thinking to deal with. I also have two other key areas that I think worth discussing. Firstly, I think the topic on SME, I felt that it focused a lot on Malaysia, and I wasn't able to learn for SMEs in other countries as well. And me being Malaysian, I kind of am familiar with the issues in the country, and I thought, unfortunately, I didn't get to learn anything from other countries. But also, I think the commentary on how, at the end of the day, it all depends on businesses to reach out. I think in normal circumstances, that is a valid commentary. But because of COVID-19, I also think asking what are governments or even organizations doing to reach out to businesses is also like another set of question, particularly because of COVID-19. Maybe businesses just don't have the avenues to reach out to begin with, or perhaps why they didn't reach out in the first place. Even before COVID-19, there were some structural issues there. I don't know about other countries, and Malaysia certainly, I wonder if that is the case. And then thirdly, I think one of the things where I felt the conversation was lacking was in terms of understanding the role of public sector, beyond than just this facilitator of how the market works. And why I say this is because I think in the context of the Southeast Asian countries, at least, the government is a strong player in how the market works. And I felt like there was a lot of comments about, yes, you still need private sector, you want the private sector to thrive, private sector need to be the driver. But the reality is, I feel, and I might be wrong here, but anyone in the panel or this group can challenge me on this. I think the role of public sector as the creator of demand itself is the thing that is happening on the ground. So I feel like discussing the role of public sector in delivering these ambitions that we have wasn't that much discussed, and I wish it was discussed a little bit more. in depth. Yeah, those are my comments.
That's a really useful set of observations on the SMEs. So, I mean, I shared your thought that it was quite Malaysia focused, and it would have been nice to hear maybe some more general reflections about other countries as well as this idea that, you know, we need to be asking from a more systemic perspective, like given the context of COVID, it's more exceptional. So maybe government needs to have a bigger role in being a bit more proactive. And totally agree on the comments on education. I think those are, that's really helpful. Next, we have Kim.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So my research area being the digital, I found the conversations with Ms. Noor and Dr. Koi to be quite interesting, but also at the same time, just attending these kinds of conversations where we talk about the tensions between national security and then the use of data and use of tech, it inevitably becomes an issue of either you know, everyone sort of has to converge towards the same value that is endorsed by internationally, or we have to understand that different contexts demand different types of responses. And I'm just wondering if there is a way in which we could get a little bit beyond that, because we're having these conversations about AI and data in many different places, but it's too. I think we've been talking about it for too long to be having this kind of general conversations about the general direction. And I'm just asking all of you guys if there is a better way in which we could talk about more specifics that in a way that's more inclusive of the level of participants, perhaps centered around a case study or something like that. Because I don't know, like. This panel conversations very useful for intros, but I think we can do a little more. So that's my that was my bit of a feedback. And yeah, and then on the role of the government part, this ties into not just the SMEs but also the digitalization part. I think that tension between the more statist approach within the Asian countries and then the other English Commonwealth or Latin America, I think that has to be fleshed out a little more and brought up, highlighted a bit more in the conversations that we have, because I think that has a significant effect on how we conduct business. But it brings together too many different spheres that had been separated before. So those are my two shortcomings.
I really like those comments. So if so I'm taking notes as we go, by the way, just so that we can start putting something together. So I think if I'm understanding your comments correctly, firstly, it would be good to move beyond these kind of well-rehearsed generalities about either inevitable convergence on a single approach in data and tech or differentiation based on context. And to do that, we need more kind of specific case studies about what we actually see on the ground, and to get a bit more specific and to be able to do a bit more of a deep dive. Does that kind of accurately capture your comment?
Yeah. Yeah, that too, and also something that I forgot that I'd forgotten to mention is that as younger generation, I think we have a different approach to tech and different ways in which we use them that may or may not be more similar to our counterparts in other parts of the world. So I'm just wondering if there is a particular dimension from the perspective of the next gen where we could contribute to this tech regulation approach.
Great. And also then, so on SMEs and digitalization, it seemed like in terms of the role of the government, what you're suggesting is that we actually need to make more explicit the fact that there is this tension between a statist approach and a more hands-off approach, because otherwise that divide kind of sits implicitly behind a lot of the discussions, but we don't actually realize the impact that it's having. Is that right?
That's correct, and thank you so much for clarifying that. Like just to add a little more to that is, it's not just the business and digitalization, but also the different attitudes in which we deal with privacy issues or data management has impacts on how governments will want to engage with their SME strategies and such. So things are getting more and more intertwined with each other, and I don't think we can just pretend that those two spheres exist separate from each other, or that we can talk about them in separation.
Great, thank you. Tom?
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. I think there's something common across all topics that were discussed over the past 2 days. And I think one of the most major issues, as I mentioned on LinkedIn, is structural issue. So I think from day one, we have panel talking about how diverse the economies are, especially across the whole Pacific Rim. So when it comes to the institutional factor facilitating the cooperation between countries, especially when we are very different in terms of our progress in development and also our cultural background, makes it a very difficult challenge. So that is what I think is a higher level, not concerned, but something that we should put it into agenda about how we should do regional integration. So following, I think someone just now mentioned, I think it's Kim, sorry, I don't know about your first name. I think he gave a very good example on AI with digital development, especially, for example, in Southeast Asia, in Singapore, they already have AI governance network happening, but some other countries in Southeast Asia are probably struggling to develop just internet in general, not to mention AI. So just a really quick examples in terms of how these differences impose challenges to regional corporations. And the other thing is, oh yeah, so this would lead to thinking about the role of ASEAN and also even for PECC as a platform, as some of the panelists mentioned in the previous 2 days. So what is our position, or what are the positions of organization like this in facilitating the regional cooperation between countries? So what exactly can we do? Like even if we act as a facilitator, what is our role in the big canvas? I think this is something that also worth considering. And there's another thing that I would like to mention is about the conflicts between, not necessarily conflicts, but cooperation between private and public sectors, as someone just mentioned as well. I remember there are also panelists mentioning about the limited capacity of governments. I mean, there are a lot of agenda on governments, but they may not be able to carry everything out at the same time. So, well, private sectors have been doing a lot of things, but there are also concerned about how much reliance we should place on private sector. So like I raised an example on LinkedIn, technology company, they are growing really, they're holding a lot of information about us to the extent that they are becoming the new governor of the world because they're becoming too powerful. So I think there's a limit that we should think about, and also for governments to think about how far private sector should be taking the lead. And if they are becoming too powerful, that basically means that the governments are getting weaker and weaker. And that's, I think it's probably not the most ideal situation that we would like to see. Yeah, that's the 3 things that I think are the key takeouts for me.
So just to make sure that that I've got that, firstly, kind of building on this point about differences between different countries, how should we address and incorporate these differences a little more explicitly, especially when there's such a big implication for the things that we're talking about, such as AI governance, where there are just vastly different kind of capacities of different governments involved in the conversation. Secondly, what is the role of bodies like, did you say ASEAN or did you say PEC?
I think it doesn't matter as long as they are like regional or transnational corporation, not limited to just.
So what role should regional organizations be playing in facilitating cooperation between countries? And then thirdly, how far should we be allowing private companies to be taking the lead, especially on things like data and privacy issues, when their incentives may not be the same as what we want as citizens?
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. Thank you.
Okay. All right, next I have Lee. Thanks for that. That was really great.
Hi everyone, can you guys hear me? Good, okay. Good morning. I think most important comments were already made, but I would like to make two contributions. First is regarding the issue of women and work during the COVID crisis, and the second is regarding SMEs, because I found that really interesting. The first one regarding the issue of work, unemployment, especially for women during the COVID crisis, I felt like the conversation was very macro focused, meaning that it was talking about big numbers and data and how the government should be tackling this issue. But I felt like at the same time, other institutions such as civil society or ground institutions like NGOs, this could be definitely considered during the conversation process, and their role shouldn't be underestimated. Especially, I was wondering how under different contexts of the APEC economies and how their civil societies were working through this issue of unemployment regarding women during the COVID crisis, and how they were dealing with the issue of inequality regarding this matter. Because I know for, at least in Korea, civil society was the main driving force of giving minorities, groups such as refugees or children or women a chance to be employed, or chance to be given masks, or chance to protect their basic rights. So that I felt like could have been discussed more. Second is regarding SMEs. It did focus on Malaysia, I do agree with that, and being a non-Malaysian, I did learn a lot. But at the same time, I wondered how this issue could be more applied to other economies to address the crisis of SME marginalization issue due to COVID, or the intergenerational issue among other countries. For example, for me, the pamper model that the lecturer talked about was very interesting, because it was tackling not only the digital divide issue, but also the issue among the young generation and the old generation. So I felt like that issue, can it be applied to other countries in APEC? And also, can it be a model that other countries can use to tackle the issues that were dealt upon during the COVID crisis? So I felt like these issues could be addressed more upon. Thanks.
Thanks very much for those comments. So yeah, I really, that was something that I took as well, about this real focus on kind of the high level numbers and the macro numbers, rather than thinking about perhaps the more human dimension and the differentiation between impact on different groups of society, especially women. And I think that digging a little bit more into some of those differences, I agree, would be a valuable thing to do. And then on SMEs, if I understand your point correctly, basically, how can we think about some of these issues in the context of other economies, and in particular, this kind of conjuncture between the digital divide, the intergenerational challenges that the impact of COVID raises, and the sort of perhaps long-term marginalization of some SMEs in some parts of society as a result. So, is that right? Okay, great. Thanks for those comments. Okay, I have Sonia again. Sorry, Rose.
I can go after, but I see that Delegate Delator has had his hand up longer than me, so I'll defer to him.
Okay.
Thank you, Sonia. Well, so going in hand with what Tom said, I think it is important to mention the importance of regional integration. And I'm seeing this as a part of Mexican or Latin American. And we can take Asian and even APEC as an example of this integration. And it is important to see these organizations as facilitators of trade, investment, and to create like policies that can be helpful to develop, again, this trade and this cooperation between the private initiative and the government or the public sector. And I see like very deep differences between, for example, Asian and the USMCA that we have with Mexico, and well, that Mexico has with the USA and Canada, or the Pacific Alliance that we have with Colombia, Peru, and Chile. So I think that Asian is an example for us as Latin Americans to see how integration can be better done.
So perhaps making a little more explicit some of the comparisons between different regional organizations that are part of the wider group of PECC countries in order to share experiences and see different ways that regional organizations can facilitate trade and investment through things like public-private partnerships and those other things.
Yeah, totally.
Great, thank you. Okay, so Sonia, over to you.
Sorry, I know I've already talked considerably, but I had some other points that came to my mind as our colleagues were talking. And obviously there's a big theme coming up of the role of the state, and particularly in the discussions on SME. I think what wasn't perhaps mentioned and could have been was the role as a facilitator of co-opetition. So, and that could be not just in SME, but regionally and on a country level. So for example, at the SME level, if there are a number of SMEs and their large barrier to digitalization is costs and investment, then the state could facilitate that pooling of resources so then they could all share the benefit. And from a more regional perspective, as I think Melissa spoke just before about some places don't even have internet, then at a more regional level, and this might be hard logistically, I don't know, I'm not an internet specialist, then perhaps there could be pooling of other resources, maybe not about internet specifically, but about creating maybe an investment group that focuses on developing those kinds of infrastructure needs in places that do not have the basic things to be able to compete or lift their people out of certain ways of living. My second point is that, and it came to me a lot during the discussions on RCEP and the CPTPP, and that discussion was also quite macro about trade, etc., which is great because that's what it's about. But I think what was missing from that was the point of trade is to alleviate poverty by increasing everyone's ability to trade and to lift standards of living. It's not trade for trade's sake, it's trade for purpose. And so, again, with the role of the state in that, is there a way that in these regional trade agreements that we can incorporate something like social procurement? So I don't know if everyone here is familiar with the term social procurement, but for instance, in New Zealand, the government for some contracts, when they put out a request for proposal, they will say, if you want to be the supplier for this government contract, which is often worth many millions of dollars, you have to ensure that 5% of your workforce is Indigenous, or you have to ensure that 40% of your workforce is women. So I just think that regional discussions like this is a way for us and other delegates to encourage their governments to be thinking of things like that. And I don't know if there's something that social procurement could fit into that discussion.
Those are great points. So basically 3 different points on the role of the state there. On the one hand, the state as a facilitator of co-opetition. So this is not a term that I'm familiar with. Is this, but basically what I understood from your comments was that there might be public goods that would be relevant to all SMEs that the state could provide to enable SMEs as a whole to kind of overcome some of the individual barriers to accessing certain resources. Is that right?
Yep, just as a role as a facilitator. So for instance, if a business doesn't have a lot of resources, they might not, like let's say Google and Microsoft. Google probably wouldn't want to talk to Microsoft, but if there was a third party that would encourage them to pool their resources, then they might be a bit more interested in it. And co-opetition, sorry, it's quite a business academic term, but it's definitely in going the rounds on LinkedIn and in the journals and the business side of things.
Yeah, I can see Microsoft Word is not showing that it's a misspelling of something else. So clearly a real word. Thank you. And so then, yeah, so also that at a regional level, and then in the context of trade and trade agreements, kind of keeping an eye on the fact that trade should be achieving some purpose, and so being more explicit about kind of putting in rules that address that perhaps social purpose more explicitly, such as social requirements for public procurement. Great. Next, Nguyen.
Hi, so I kind of want to bounce off of what Sonia just mentioned about appreciating to see like more evidence of poverty reduction, or what progress or stalled progress has been happening because of COVID in terms of that. And I think it's especially important because I don't think there's any, investment in infrastructure or anything like that could happen if you're not ensuring that like your population has a decent living conditions, and at the same time, this population cannot be productive or educated without those basic rights ensured. So I think some speakers mentioned that like a lot of countries have pumped up like fiscal stimulus or certain policies to help people in need, and especially in times of emergency like this. But I also would have liked to see some discussion about how sustainable it is, because there is some mention that like this could really break some countries' systems that are already, probably not that well equipped to respond. And I think as well, like another indicator that I might have been more interested in is productivity, and I think this would be well linked with education, especially. So I think that's and to broaden that discussion a little bit more, to see how countries would be able to transition from being resource or labor intensive to more innovative. So I think that indicator, I'm pretty sure there is probably some statistics or projections about it, but would have been nice to see where we stand right now with COVID.
2 great points, thanks. So firstly, kind of just reminding ourselves that poverty reduction and ensuring basic needs and rights are kind of the first priority, and nothing else is able to be sustainable without making sure that those needs are being met first and foremost, and then thinking about, well, how sustainable anyway is the sort of fiscal stimulus that we're having and all that kind of stuff. And then second, this suggestion to think more about productivity, and especially in the context of education, and how countries can then transition more effectively up the value chain, as it were. Is that right? Okay. Next, I have Espinoza Cruz.
Yes, can you guys hear me? Okay, so I don't know if someone mentioned this before, so I will just throw it out. But I think that huge potential partners in order to cope and to sort out the challenges that the region and especially socioeconomic challenges for the region are local NGOs, local social organizations, because these organizations are actually working in the field with local communities, and then I believe that they can cope better with especially with inequalities such as gender inequalities, income inequalities, educational inequalities, and we can see that all across the region, of course. I don't know. I mean, I know for a fact that in most of Southeastern Asian countries, NGOs have a very active participation in public life. But here in Latin American countries, for example, their work is continuously undermined by governments. And I think that if we can bring a broader and deeper discussion on how local social organizations and local NGOs can how can we bring them into the table? They could be great partners in order to face all the challenges we've been discussing.
Thank you. I think that was a really great point on, so basically finding ways that we can talk more about the work that local organizations and NGOs are doing, and also create better links for them to bring them into the conversation about how to address some of the challenges that we face, because they are very well placed to actually address these challenges because they're doing it in the field all the time. Is that a good summary, would you say?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Next is you.
Hi, thank you. So I just want to continue off of where Nguyen spoke about the poverty alleviation during such a time. I think that digital transformation itself, I mean, other than just discussion on e-commerce or automation, I think it's not really well recognized enough as a tool to improve digital infrastructure that complements fiscal policy in a way that can help governments to really identify the people who in need. Like, for example, I think Thailand, they used this digital app called PromptPay that helped to make digital cash transfers to those in need. I think really digital transformation kind of helps the government to really reach out to especially for countries where social protection benefit penetration is really low. For example, like India, where digital improvement in digital infrastructure can not just span like things like automation, e-commerce, but can also be improving mobile phone coverage or internet coverage that helps to identify those people that have been overlooked from various social protection systems. So I guess it's just from a point of view where digital transformation is not just do not just look at it from the point of view of jobs or rather or like improving youth entrepreneurship through e-commerce, but also it can be an effective tool for the government to really complement their fiscal efforts to reach out to the less fortunate people.
I think this is a really great comment, and I think joins some of the other comments in suggesting ways in which there are maybe more interesting connections between these different topics and ways that they can work together. So here, the good example is that the digital transformation can help the government to achieve its other social objectives, including poverty alleviation, by creating new possibilities for reaching parts of the population and so on. Thank you. Next, Kang.
Thank you. So I actually wanted to focus more on youth as we have to address youth-related topic. So during the discussion last 2 days, we heard that they said that technology is going to help with reimagining as well as transformation of the education and training. But actually we have experienced like past almost 1 year about these digital platforms as students. So I think we already know how there are more space to improve for like interactive or interpersonal learnings that we really couldn't get as much in person through the digital platform. I don't know how the technology is going to be improved further, but I thought that it would be better if, because we all know that the digital platform is important, then we have to utilize this at maximum especially in this kind of situation. But I thought that it could be better if we could address more about the like reality, like challenges that we are facing as a student or younger generation at schools, universities, and even like primary and secondary schools. So like maybe during the agenda suggestion, I think it would be great if we can share those experiences and like deliver how the students are feeling and younger generation are feeling in the field of school, and how maybe we can, I don't know, mitigate this fatigue or like improvements, like the potential improvements of the interpersonal, interactive, I don't know, learnings through the digital platform. I think it's like, it can be a brainstorming of ours from our experiences. And a lot of people talked about in our discussion as well, a lot of people talked about the equality, but I feel like I prefer to use the term equity instead of equality. I think you already know the meanings, like what is the difference between those two terms? Because like we have quite limited resources, especially during this pandemic. So we cannot give we cannot provide every resources the same amount or same level, but it turns out that we have to focus and like acknowledge the different demographics or like socioeconomic status of the population. I think that includes the vulnerable groups that we have mentioned about the women, younger generation, including the topics that we earlier addressed about the youth unemployment or jobs insecurity. So that was my second point. And the third point was, I actually expected that a lot of discussion is going to be about US and China trade war situation, because I thought that I could expect more like casual discussion or dialogue about it. But I think that discussion was not that addressed during the last two sessions. So I expected, but I couldn't hear that much about it. And my last point is, and I realized during the session about the digital application for the silver ICT, delivered by a Japanese panel speaker, that because like back in days, I think I tend to just categorize elderly as a one demographic, but I realized that there are like two types, like tends to be two types of the characteristics among those elderly as well. So I was thinking that like when we are applying that to our youth generation, maybe we have the common things, but we also have to acknowledge there will be diversity in our younger generation. And in addition to that, just like what we have mentioned during this discussion, the context of the like cultural or economic is very important to be considered when we are thinking about the intervention. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks. So 3 great points there, or 4 great points there. So firstly, that it could be really worthwhile to share some of student experiences from our digital learning platforms that people have experienced over the last year under COVID, to talk about some of the challenges that those have involved, and ways that we can kind of learn from those challenges when designing digital platforms, and talking about the way that they might evolve. Is that a fair? Yep. And then this distinction between equity versus equality, I think, is useful. So given our limited resources, we need to acknowledge the different needs of different parts of society and accept that we can't address everybody's needs because we have limited resources, but therefore we need to target more marginalized groups more directly, perhaps, and to try and kind of reach more directly to groups that are lacking in resources most. US-China trade war, yeah, I was also missing a bit more of this discussion. And then this is an interesting point with the silver ICT context. So I agree. I think this is another theme that's coming up, is that it's not just one demographic in these things, but there are always kind of more than one, there's always more than one group within these different groups. And so thinking about differentiating any intervention is going to be essential based on context and kind of particular needs. So, yeah, okay. Sazali?
Hi everybody. Good morning from Malaysia. So I have like 3 points to make. Picking up from other speakers. Number one would be like the NGOs, and then the role of NGOs in during this crisis, because I feel that I don't know, from the outsider, if you are from business or you're from the government, and this is just me assuming, but you will look down on NGOs. There's not much role that they can play. But however, I think that during this COVID-19 especially, you will see that they have played the biggest role in implementations, because they are the closest people to the community. And then because the government is really far, especially in Malaysia. I'll give you an example. During COVID-19, they realized that because everything has to be moved online, students have to learn from home. They have to reach out for lower income families without smartphones to engage in the online learning. The problem is for the application process, they make it very, very difficult, that you require a laptop and then stable internet just to get the mobile phone. So in the end, they ended up not even able to, there are a lot of leftover smartphones to be given to the students. Because like that's this assumptions that how could you expect a low-income families to be able to have a laptop and then stable internet? So that's I feel that there's a problems with implementations, and that's the really, really big role of NGOs can play. And then even, I'm sorry to again come back to Malaysia because that's what I'm most familiar with. Even for Malaysia, it's like we have the fiscals, the money that to be given out, but reaching out individuals are really, really difficult, especially like when you cannot meet in person. And the second point that I have, I'm going to make is on strategic thinkings, that a lot of programs or policy are very short-termism. They think about like saving livelihoods, which is really, really important, I agree. But I feel that I'm slightly disappointed that there's no really like long-term or strategic thinking about like how do we fix, the structural problems that result in these short-term shocks. For example, the treatment of foreign workers in Malaysia, because of our treatments of foreign workers, that leads to an outbreak of COVID-19, and also like the infrastructures of where the rural areas don't even have internet connections. These are structural problems that cause, so what I'm saying is we are seeing symptoms. So unless we think about, think strategically about the cure, this will again, we'll be seeing the same problems again and again. And the third point that I have to make on trade, I'm not sure if my sentiment is shared with other people, but the COVID-19, because it's quite difficult to do trades, especially for physical goods. I'm not talking about, things that can transpire like, through the internet. It has been a direct challenge to globalizations and trade actually. Some countries have actually looked inward. So they feel that, okay, now because of COVID, we have to beef up our local economy. We have to be more self-sustained. So I wonder what would the implication be on international trades. That's all. Those are the 3 points that I'm going to make. Thanks.
Three great points. So firstly, I think another call for us to acknowledge the role of NGOs as having this essential role in knowing the context in which they're working, and therefore being able to actually engage in the hard work of implementing the policies that governments are coming up with. And good example there of lower income families, you know, having these additional barriers to accessing the technology that was being provided for online learning. And then, yeah, structural problems. So I agree, and I guess this is another example of one of the themes that I think is coming out a lot here, is that we're seeing lots of ways in which the different challenges that we're facing, COVID, the environment, you know, all of poverty reduction, all of these things are not isolated, but, you know, they relate to some big structural things, you know, to do with, let's say, the Anthropocene, right? Our role as humans and the effect as humans that we have on our environment. And so thinking about that structural context rather than addressing these like siloed issues, I think is essential. I think that's a really good point, another further example of some of those connections. And then trade, yes, I think, you know, this is it might really prompt a lot of countries to rethink the way that they're engaging in the global economy and push them to try and be more self-reliant. Yeah, I agree with this point as well. Thank you for those. There are no other hands up at the moment, but I want to, I mean, maybe now that we've got some ideas out there, I wonder if we could, instead of just sort of facilitating this in a static way, just open it up for a general conversation, and maybe we can have a chance now to react to some of the things that have been said.
What were your thoughts, Matthew? You facilitated us, but I don't think we've heard what your feedback was.
I think that my main reaction, thanks Sonia, my main reaction was that I would have liked to have a bit more thinking about the human dimension, and to kind of dig a little bit deeper beyond the macro level, as some people have put it today. And so that, you know, that includes looking beyond, say, headline GDP figures, looking beyond this as an opportunity for a shock, which then as an economy as a whole, we recover from. But I think foregrounding the human cost, especially with COVID, is something that maybe I would have liked to think about more. And then I think I would really agree with the comment that that was just made around a lot of the issues that are being talked about. You know, we can and I think should be thinking about ways that they all relate to one another, and relate to some really big structural challenges that we face in the context of the Anthropocene, in the context of climate change, of man-made climate change, and our role on our environment. So some of my comments, I think a lot, basically they've been made today already, but. Joshi?
Yeah, this is sort of my own point, and I hope I haven't missed the window to give my feedback. But so just approaching things from the lens of climate change again, given the magnitude of the issue and the significance it has not just for ASEAN, but APEC and the PECC region as well. And of course, the impact it has on the youth in general. So there was a great focus on this particular topic in session 3, and particularly what can be done to facilitate transitions to lower carbon economies, the roles of sustainable finance in the private sector. And maybe I missed this particular aspect of the discussion, but I feel like a coming together like this provides us with a significant opportunity to build towards a more regional and integrated climate change policies, given after all, the climate challenge is borderless in nature, and different countries at different stages of development face varying hurdles in achieving the sort of mitigation and adaptation actions that are necessary over the coming years. So both these points sort of highlight the importance of cooperation and mutual action when it comes to tackling this issue. And this also fits seamlessly into discussions on enhancing regional integration in trade and investment, and makes sense given the gravity of climate change that we do make efforts to integrate and internationalize to a degree our climate action. So even if it's something that doesn't encompass the entirety of the PECC region, of course that could be a much more significant challenge, and even if it just starts with an ASEAN focus. And to that end, I came across a paper yesterday that was analyzing the state of monitoring, reporting, and verification mechanisms in individual ASEAN countries as a sort of foundation block for the development of a regional carbon pricing mechanism in ASEAN. So even things like this would be a step in the right direction. And let's say the development of a strong MRV, monitoring, reporting, verification infrastructure within ASEAN would benefit from regional cooperation assistance from other countries anyway, particularly for lower income countries who don't have this sort of infrastructure in place anyway. And ultimately for carbon pricing policy to work most optimally, it cannot be limited within borders, and it should have more international focus. And also, whatever regional climate cooperation there is doesn't have to be limited to carbon pricing or carbon markets, but even things like standardizing our environmental standards would be a step in the right direction. And another thought I had, again, related to climate change, and I want to caveat this with the warning that I have not thought too deeply about this, and there will be holes in this argument, but when we consider what trade agreements should look like in the 21st century in an age where sustainability and climate change is a massive issue, there's a need to ensure that our trade agreements come with a significant environmental chapters. So this is something that was missing in RCEP. Yeah, it's an opportunity in itself to move towards greater integration, regional integration, but there are environmental impacts of greater trade that should be addressed as well to a greater degree. And but at the same time, there's the on the other hand, and that trade agreements are already so convoluted and can be controversial and contentious, and adding further pressure to the discussion by adding the need to address climate action can be more difficult to come to these sort of agreements. So those are some of the thoughts that I've had.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree too. I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, coming up with regional ways of thinking about how we can address climate change rather than all just doing, every country doing their own thing seems essential. I mean, certainly as a first step to doing that on a global scale. And that I agree with you. It seems like there are so many opportunities for different tools that could be developed at the regional level, short of integrating emissions trading schemes or anything like that. Even just from the MRV perspective, as you say, like coming up with common frameworks there. I think that's a really good comment. And then, yeah, totally agree on trade agreements and the need for them to be a bit more explicit about environmental implications of trade. Yeah, what do other people think about this? Oh, Sergio, I think you had your hand up again.
Yes, I actually wanted to address another thing that we were discussing in the chat actually, and but I think it's very important because Sonia and also you were speaking about how we have been focusing a lot in the implications of digitalization in business, and we also think that there is a rising issue and rising concerns in what it comes to taxation, because a lot of different countries have realized that if they can tax e-commerce, they can grow their revenue base, and also they can, taking these global digital companies to be accountable for their activities in the not only in terms of economic consequences, but also social and political consequences. And this is a thing that we believe that it must be addressed in a regional scale, because we think, or we believe that all national scale efforts will be less effective if they are not followed by regional efforts, because the nature of e-commerce is cross-border. So it is very, very easy for these companies to just one day decide to go to another country and base their activities, or at least their fiscal activities in another country. No, so I think that this is an issue that it must be faced in a regional scale, and I think that it is something that can be also brought into the discussion.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think the comments that are being made in the chat on this are really good. And I mean, so I think trying to just kind of distill down the essence of the comment, it seems that again here in a similar way that, you know, we can't look at environmental issues and climate change solely at the national level, because, you know, there's leakage and concerns with spillovers from anything that one country does. We also need to be thinking about taxation of global businesses, again, global problem, at a more cooperative level. So perhaps if we're thinking about kind of the comment there, I can see a common theme there, I suppose, between those issues and many of the others that we're talking about, that there needs to be more of an emphasis on regional responses to regional issues and global responses to global issues, but certainly as a first step, the regional response. So yeah, great further comment in that vein from you guys. I'm just thinking now, so it's 10 past 10 or 10 past 3 New Zealand time, and I think that we have another hour or another 50 minutes together to discuss in order to come up with our communique before we're joined by, or before we join the PECC panelists. Is that, can someone correct me if I'm right there?
Yes, you're right, Matthew. We will need to end the session at 11.
Okay.
So that we can start the next session at 11:05.
Okay, and at 11:05, that's when we're presenting our communique.
Yes, that's where you will be presenting the memorandum to the PECC members and having an open discussion with them on your feedback.
Great. And during that open discussion, I'm assuming that we're all able to participate in that and pick up on the points that we raise in the memorandum. Is that right?
Yes, you will all be able to talk directly to the PECC members.
Okay. So then I think perhaps it would be a good idea, I don't know what everybody thinks, to start kind of thinking about some of the overarching themes that we've been discussing. Can I suggest, seeing as we're a big group, could I suggest maybe using some breakout rooms and using those to basically take into account the discussion that we've just been having, and then try to come up with, say, a few sort of common themes to the discussion that we've had, and then we could come back together and kind of put those together as a way of coming up with the memorandum that we're producing together. How do people feel about that idea?
Sorry, Matthew, are you going to do like a breakout session?
I'm wondering about it. I'm not sure of the best way to facilitate us collectively writing this shared document. Unless does someone have a suggestion for putting that together?
I was thinking that maybe you can share your screen like with a Word doc.
Oh, great.
Google Doc, and the other participants can just, just give you the one-liner and then the explanation, if that's better.
Yes. So I'll make a Google Doc, and we can share that, and then hopefully everybody can access that.
Yeah, and maybe we could have 10 to 15 minutes where we just review the documents and then add our own comments, and then we have a discussion after that. I think that might be most efficient.
I think that's a good idea. So what I can do is, I was kind of trying to take notes as we were going just then. And so what I can suggest is copying over all of those notes and putting them in a Google document, sharing that with you, and then I'm sure that I will have got some of the comments wrong. And so as a first step, we can go through, and people whose comments I was writing about can correct where I've captured it incorrectly. And then from there, we can take that and kind of come together and pull together some themes. How does that sound to everybody?
Sounds good.
Great. So here's the test of my tech skills. Can everybody see that? See that link there? Great.
It says that access is needed. So would you be able to change the settings so that it's open to everyone with links?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, maybe I'm being... so I think everyone can see it now, but can you edit it?
I have to request.
I'm sorry, guys. How do I...
I can see it now.
I think it's working now.
It's working? So we can all edit it?
It still says that edit access has to be requested.
Sorry, can someone, like, I'm obviously being dumb here, so can someone explain to me how I change the setting?
I think you need to, so before you send out the link, maybe you need to enable everyone to edit. So on the top right-hand corner of the box, maybe before you send it out, instead of just letting us view it, you can let all of us edit it.
If there are
difficulties, try now.
I can.
Yep, I can
It's
see.
working now.
Yes,
okay.
it's working. Thank you so
we
much.
got this, sorry.
Sorry guys, I'm just gonna enter down and so we can have a summary of key themes at the top.
So for the presentation of the memorandum, because it's so it's about 10 to 12 points, so it shouldn't take more than 10 minutes, because we do want to give you the chance to explain what you've presented, and also to have like a frank interaction with the PECC members themselves. And just to highlight why this exercise is quite important. So in the last session of today, just among the PECC members, we're going to be highlighting the key takeaways of every session. And so that they can, so that the PECC members can think about new issues or ongoing issues to look into when they set up their task forces. So that's how they do their policy work, their research, to be presented to APEC through the senior official meetings platform. So I see your contribution as complementing whatever we have from the two-day session itself. And then you will also have your say in what should PECC focus on. So if it's climate change, then maybe again, they can really concentrate on that for the next coming year. And hopefully the policy recommendations can be funneled for the next APEC, to the next APEC summit. And this would be when New Zealand will play host next year.
Right.
Thank you.
Cool.
Just a reminder to everyone that you have around 10 to 15 minutes to convey the points to the PECC standing committee. So make sure you can prioritize the points very well, because you also need to get their responses in a constructive manner, right? So yeah, make sure you prioritize the points during the presentation itself.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And so the idea there is that that I'll read out the key points and then we can come back to it to discuss together. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. There would be some time for discussion. So maybe it would be more open during that period of time.
Okay, thanks.
Another way we can do this is when you present the priority issues, you can select some, because now I see that it's about 6 pages long. What we can also do is send this document to the PECC Secretariat themselves, so that if they were to think about the task force ideas for the next year, they can go back to this document and refer to it.
Thanks, Trita. I think the idea that we're working on here is to bring out some of the key themes at the top of the document, and then basically that will be the communique. So the rest of it is kind of the material for coming up with those key themes. Is that
okay, great.
Is it correct,
so
everybody?
Like, yeah, it's like so the rest will be in the appendix of the memorandum.
I think the rest was basically just some very rough notes of everything that we were discussing, and now we're kind of synthesizing that in those key points at the top of the page. So I think we'll just include those key points
Yes.
in the
Yes,
communique.
that sounds good. Okay, thank you.
Does everybody agree with that approach?
Yes. What you can do is send to me the document. I'll email to them immediately. So when they have their discussion after the dialogue, they can take some point.
I wonder if we
Thanks,
do want
Betty.
to send it, then we'd want to edit it a little bit. It's kind of just a brain dump at this moment, right?
I agree. I think we wouldn't want to send this whole thing. In my view, best to just send those key points at the top. Do people agree?
I think you should send the whole document to me. Later on we can discuss, because we're going to post it into the website as your comment on the general meeting issue.
Okay, I think I agree with Sonia that maybe we would want to edit it a little more, because it's very rough at the moment, but we'll keep working on this.
Yeah, and then we
Thanks.
can send it, yes.
Thanks, Betty.
So I'm just keeping in mind that we have limited time. So should we discuss the order of the key themes? Because from what my understanding is that we should have the most important ones first.
I think that that's a good idea.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So I wonder whether do people want to put in the chat what they think is so we have here 5 different themes. So climate change, the role of the state, regional solutions, importance of youth, and adopting a systemic perspective. And then what was missing, I think, is something that is probably a good thing to conclude with, rather than being one of those key themes. Would people agree with that?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So within those 5 different key themes, so climate change, role of the state, regional solutions, youth, do people want to maybe put next to one of them in the Google Doc which they think is the most important? And then we can see visually very easily, maybe put an X next to it like this, so that we can all see, we can just count it up then to see which we think is the most important here.
Matthew?
Yep.
Sorry. So looking at those 5 things though, I think there is a clear difference in the sense that the last 2 topics, importance of youth and adopting a systemic perspective, those are more of a methodological issue, a broader issue that applies to all of them.
Yep.
And then we're talking about more specific issues under climate change, role of state, and the regional solutions. So I'm wondering if we could reflect the different levels of analysis that we have.
So what I've just done is put those second 2 first then. Would you agree with that? That seems to be the most kind of thematic, or the highest level first in that sense, and then the other 3 topics, climate change, role of the state, and regional solutions, are more kind of specific points.
Mm-hmm. And maybe have a sentence each at the beginning of the first 2, that these are the broader issues, and then before we get into the 3 issues, we just say that, or these are the 3 very specific areas that we can that we have engaged with.
So you mean those are kind of guiding comments, and then the actual issues themselves are the other 3? Is that what you mean, Dongo?
Yeah, the first
I
2 seem to have more of a.
Is it like a the 3 things are the issues, but the first 2 are like the approaches that we would like to go about it. It has to be you have to look at structural things, and you have to include youth as a key player in solving these 3 issues that we discussed.
So perhaps could we say that we have 2 general comments about the nature of the discussions and the broad approach to the discussions at PECC, and then 3 specific comments, or 3 comments on specific issues that we felt never, addressed other issues as well. Okay, so maybe we can come up with some language around that.
I think the importance of youth goes really well into climate change, because my sense is that the older generation does not have that really urgent need to address it that the younger generations do. So I think that flows really well.
Good comment.
Dongu, I've put in red in the what was missing from the conference discussion, your point on continuing the discussion, but I don't think I phrased it how you did. Would you mind having a look?
Yeah, you got it.
Sorry, just a thought. Because climate change cuts across the role of the state and the regional solutions as well, do you think it would be a good idea to put the climate change section below those two?
I wonder whether, if we feel that it cuts across the others, that maybe we should talk about it first.
Okay, yeah.
But I'm open to.
I think there's an argument to be made, like
yeah,
what you're saying and what I'm saying as well. So
I'm happy to do it third. I'll move it. So I think we need to just limit our space a little bit here and make sure that we at least fit on 2 pages. I think the idea is really that we're able to, 1.5 pages would be enough, I think. So maybe if there's anywhere that we can economize a few words, that might be a good idea.
So do we remove the climate action point under regional solutions because it's deliberated more explicitly in the climate change point?
Sorry, what was the question? Whether we think it's a good idea to have moved it down, or whether we should keep it at the top like it was? Or
No, so under regional solutions, you have climate action there, right?
Right.
Yeah, so I think we just remove that because it's deliberated a lot better in the climate change point.
Good idea. Dongwoo.
Yes, sir.
May I suggest that that we leave the migration brain drain?
Yes, hence the parentheses. Yeah, please feel free to take it out.
I agree that it's an important topic, but maybe we can try and raise it during the discussion.
Yeah, it sounds good.
Okay.
Do we have more points to talk about in the taxation of large digital companies?
Yes, I think perhaps we could again leave that for the discussion, and or unless, would someone like to add a line there? I'm just conscious of the space that we have and really trying to keep this to 2 pages.
Okay, fair, because I actually don't remember if we talked that much about it, but we can discuss about it later, I think.
It's kind of included under regional solutions.
Yeah, I think the point was that maybe we can elaborate on that, because we talked about more than, there were a few points that were raised there, but there's kind of just one line, but maybe we can
I think it could be further elaborated in the first point of the regional solutions, where it says this includes trade and taxation. We can maybe elaborate a little bit more on digital companies there.
There's a point which is floating on the at the very top of the second page. That would be the point to do it, I think, because
Cool.
Would somebody like to volunteer to add some language to that line?
I could do it.
Thanks.
Matt, do you want to do a test run with us shortly?
That sounds good. So I think one thing, just to kind of tidy up what we have, I think we've got a couple of two really good pages, and then we've got some extra notes, and I wonder whether we could put those extra notes just kind of separate, and we collectively could refer back to those in the discussions. And so that could be a place like during the discussion, if there are points that, like those statistics, Darshan, I saw you have found some, which is great. We could refer back to those in the discussions, but I'll limit myself to just talking about the first 2 pages in the delivery of the memorandum. And so we can call the first 2 pages the memorandum, and then the other pages are essentially some notes for ourselves.
Sounds good.
Okay. Dongwoo?
Yep.
How do you feel about Sati's suggestion to move the conversations on tech, which I think was your point originally, beyond, it's up to the second point there, so to the point about going beyond the macro numbers and including experiences that are a bit more detailed?
Yeah, that sounds good.
So then I can just link it by saying about 6 minutes, 6 or 7 minutes before the start of before the end of this session, would people feel comfortable in having a bit of a chat about this now as a way to make sure that I'm accurately capturing the points that everybody would like to have included?
Yep.
Cool. So I'm very pleased to be presenting this Memorandum of the Youth to the 27th General Meeting of the PECC. I'm aware that we'll be sharing this document with you, but allow me to please speak to the themes that we've come up with. There are 2 overarching comments that we want to make to begin this memorandum, which speak to some of the general approaches that we felt were taking place during the discussions. Now these are more general points that cut across several different issue areas. We also have 3 more specific points that we'd like to raise about some of the key themes that emerged from the discussion. So talking to those general points first, we felt that it was very important to emphasize to a greater extent some of the systemic conditions that sit behind the specific challenges that we have been discussing over the last 2 days. Adopting this more systemic perspective on addressing challenges would allow us to think about some of the systemic factors that underpin issues such as the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, inequality, and poverty alleviation. If we deal with these issues only in isolation, then we might end up taking a short-term view on addressing these challenges while not resolving the systemic conditions that lead to their emergence and sustain them as long-term issues. Essentially, we need to avoid adopting a siloed approach to dealing with these challenges by looking at the common factors among them. The second point that we would like to emphasize as a matter of general principle is the importance of the next generation's role in not only offering our opinions and advising, but also being involved in making decisions. I think it's important to acknowledge that members of the next generation have, in many cases, a greater stake on some of the long-term challenges that we're facing together, such as climate change and welfare, especially where these have intergenerational consequences and implications. by engaging in particular on the next generation's experience of using digital platforms for education and training, as we've all experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic, we will be able to better appreciate some of the lessons that we can gain from this, and as part of the development of digital solutions. For instance, developing a better appreciation of how interpersonal dynamics can be important to education, and overcoming fatigue of remote learning. Now onto these three specific comments. The first of these is the role of the state, which is something that we felt came up in a number of different contexts. We felt it was important to stress that state capacities in the wider region are very different, but that states are nevertheless important players in the economy in a lot of Asian Pacific countries. Given that states are important players and important economic actors in and of their own rights, we felt it was important to talk more directly to the role that states and governments can play in addressing such challenges as poverty, unemployment, and climate change. Similarly, we would have liked to see greater regional solutions being discussed that could incorporate how countries of different capacity levels can help one another. On a related note, we felt that an area which could have been dealt with in greater depth was that of NGOs and civil society groups. Often these are groups that are working in the field and have intimate knowledge of the people with whom they're dealing. And they're the ones that are implementing the strategies and policies developed by states. Because these groups have such an important role in engaging directly with people, with citizens, they need to be addressed as well, as they're a facilitator of cooperation, especially for marginalized groups and communities that the state may have difficulty in reaching. We also felt that there were many issues where the challenges that we face are clearly shared. Accordingly, we need to address these at a regional level. This includes issues such as trade and trade agreements, as well as taxation and climate change, which I'll turn to as a separate point. Okay, we're running out of time, but I think how's that sounding to everybody?
Sounds really good.
Is there anything that we would like to put as kind of a concluding message here?
For me personally, I think one of the key things that we keep talking about is that, yes, it's really important to have these general conversations, but we're not moving to urgent solutions. And that doesn't mean they need to be next week, but we're still focusing on the problem and not how we're solving it. That was my takeaway.
Okay, good.
And I think it's also important to appreciate like how we are trying to do this intergenerational conversation through this next gen meeting, so they can keep up with like applying or sharing the discussions among during this time.
So stress the intergenerational dynamics of this.
Yeah, I agree. And remember to introduce yourself. You didn't introduce yourself, even though we know who you are.
Yeah. So can I ask our facilitators, Jita and Mohammed, any final points that you would like to make before we finish this this session?
No, I think it sounds good. You have very concrete suggestions, and hopefully will provide a very strong foundation for further frank discussions with the PECC members themselves. So we have 5 more minutes before the next session. And if everybody is okay, I will let in the other PECC members in this room if there's no other secrets to be shared just among the next gen. No, just kidding.
Dr. Juita, can you let the next gen participants to take a 5-minute break first? Because they've been talking for 2 hours.
Yes, please.
Sure, let's take a 5-minute break. But
And
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I will-
And sorry.
You guys can take a 5-minute break while we let the others in. Is that okay?
Yes.
We'll be fine.
Okay, I'll let them in. So for the next gen.
Before you let them in, can I just ask one question?
Sure, yeah.
May I please ask how it's appropriate to address the members that you're letting in?
So there'll be 2 co-chairs. So the co-chairs would be Ambassador Don Campbell from Canada and Ambassador Suga from China. So they will be co-chairing the last session, which is our session. I mean, the last session which comes after this session with the PECC standing members. So maybe you can address them and the other PECC members just as PECC members, and then I think after you present, then they will take that cue and give a few opening remarks, and then let the discussion flow freely.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so if you need to go to the bathroom or have that coffee or grab a quick lunch, I don't know if you can eat within like 5 minutes, please do so, but I will let the rest in. Good morning, everyone. In the interest of time, may I now invite Mr. Matthew Castle to present the Next Gen's memorandum to the PECC members. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I'd like to acknowledge the co-chairs of this session. Excellencies, thank you for this opportunity for us as the Next Generation delegates to present our views on the important proceedings of the previous 2 days. Please let me introduce myself. My name is Matt Castle. I'm a lecturer at Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand. I am humbled to have been chosen to present this memorandum on behalf of the Next Generation delegates, which we have put together over the last 2 days. I'm aware that we will be sharing this document with you and that you'll have an opportunity to read it. Allow me to please speak to it now. There are 2 overarching comments that we would like to make to begin this memorandum. These comments speak to the general approach of the PECC discussions and are themes that sit behind much of our deliberations. We also have 3 more specific points that we would like to make about some of the key themes that emerged from this discussion. Turning to these overarching comments first. The first is that we feel it is essential to adopt a systemic perspective on addressing challenges. We feel it is important not only to identify the specific challenges that we are facing individually and collectively, but to identify the common systemic factors that underpin these issues, from the COVID-19 pandemic to climate change to inequality and poverty alleviation. If we deal with these issues in isolation, then we might end up taking a short-term view on addressing these challenges while failing to resolve the systemic conditions that sit behind them. Essentially, we feel that we need to avoid a siloed approach to dealing with these challenges and instead look at the factors that they may have in common. The second overarching point that we would like to make is the importance of the Next Generation's role, not only in offering our advice and our viewpoint on the discussions, but in being intimately involved in making decisions. I think it's important to acknowledge that members of the Next Generation have a really great stake in many of the issues that we have been discussing over the last 2 days. In particular, issues that will have long-lasting effects, such as climate change and intergenerational welfare implications of such things as the COVID-19 pandemic. To give one example of some of the insights that the next generation can usefully share, many of us have recently had the experience of using digital platforms for education and training. Now, digital platforms and digitalization was one of the key themes of the last 2 days' deliberations. I can say that these have not been easy experiences using these digital platforms for education. They have had many challenges, and we've learned a lot over the course of the past year. As we consider the utilization and development of digital tools, we feel it's important to learn from these experiences. Such questions as how can we achieve close interpersonal ties during our education, and how can we overcome the fatigue of remote learning in the long term, I think are central to the effective development and rolling out of digital tools in areas such as education and other. In addition to these two overarching comments about the importance of systemic factors and the role of the youth, there are three more specific points that we would be glad to make about some of the themes that emerged from the discussion. The first relates to the role of the state. We feel that, acknowledge that state capacities in the wider PECC region are very different. But states are also important players in many of the economies of the region. They are therefore central to solving many of the issues related to poverty, unemployment, and climate challenges that we face. On a related note, we would like to see regional solutions that incorporate how countries of different capacity levels can help each other to support the state to be more actively involved in achieving solutions to these challenges. We also feel that non-governmental organizations, local groups, civil society organizations, and other non-state actors should be addressed more directly in our consideration of dealing with and rolling out responses to the challenges that we face. NGOs, civil society groups, these are institutions that have an intimate knowledge of the state of play on the ground. They are involved in dealing with people on a daily basis, and in particular when it comes to developing and administering policy that tries to target marginalized groups and communities, it is essential that we incorporate and actively involve non-governmental organizations and civil society groups. The second key theme that we felt important to stress was that of regional solutions to regional challenges. There are clearly many issues that we face where the challenge is a shared one. These issues should accordingly be addressed at a regional level. Two examples that we feel illustrate this are that of trade and that of taxation, and climate change, which I'll return to in the third point. Now, in terms of trade, we feel it's important to stress that the point of trade is not trade in and of itself, but that it achieves some wider social objective, be it raising living standards or alleviating poverty. Regional trade agreements should therefore include provisions that directly acknowledge and deal with these wider social objectives. For instance, we could think of some society-specific priorities, such as the rights of indigenous communities, that should be discussed and empowered by regional groupings when formulating trade agreements. The second example is that of taxation. Taxation of large digital companies is clearly a sensitive issue which emerged in the discussion that we had. We believe that these firms need to be held accountable, and this can be effective only at a regional level because their businesses cross borders. The final topic that we would like to discuss with you now is that of climate change. While this was very usefully addressed during the last 2 days, we felt it important to stress that this can't be dealt with in isolation. Every topic needs to include or be linked to climate change action. It is the defining issue of our time and impacts everything. In this case, it needs to be discussed in this light. We feel that the importance of climate change cannot be overstated. This is an opportunity to better think about the regional level approaches to climate change and fits with enhancing regional integration and regional trade as well. And so there are many cross-cutting issues here. Climate change is another example of a borderless issue and requires solutions that transcend national boundaries. In terms of concrete solutions and suggestions, we felt that even starting with an ASEAN focus would be a step in a really good direction. Options might include a regional focus on monitoring, reporting, and verification structures, the development of common environmental standards, and a regional carbon pricing mechanism. Moreover, when we consider what trade agreements should look like in the 21st century, when climate change and sustainability are critical policy considerations, these considerations need to come with significant, or these agreements need to come with significant environmental chapters, and the climate impacts of greater trade should be addressed directly in these institutions. Finally, there were some points where we felt there were some elements that were missing from the discussion that some of us were expecting to see. These also include some ideas for what we feel are important points to address in the future. Firstly, we felt that there could be stronger language on what government could be doing to address issues that are commonly accepted as a problem. We came up with the example that governments should be encouraged to regulate or make compulsory the linkages between the education system and the needs of the labor market. Relying on universities as the sole problem solver in this regard is essentially making things too late. This needs to happen from the very bottom up. Second, and this was a theme that resonated with a lot of us, we felt it very important to move beyond discussing issues and solutions in terms of the macro numbers or headline effects. So by including experiences from marginalized communities and NGOs and including them as active players to solve issues, we felt that we could dig a little deeper into the human dimension of many of the issues that we dealt with. In a similar vein, the conversations on global, regional, and tech governance remain often general and a little obvious. And there needs to be an effort to move beyond the call for action and engage in issues or case study specific conversations to facilitate some constructive conversations towards identifying feasible solutions. Third, education is not just about universities, and we felt that the discussion here was somewhat limited to the change from physical learning to online learning, and in particular in the context of university education. The emphasis on lifelong learning we felt is very important, and what governments and regional groupings can do to support this we felt was missing. This goes to the point that education is not only about educating youth, but also older people who may have missed out on employment because of COVID-19 in particular. Finally, an aspect of human development that we did not see in the discussions was health. We thought that this needed to be addressed in addition to education, for example, health system education is strengthening. And then the final point to make is that while inclusion was a key theme of the 2 days discussion, we felt that gender and Indigenous solutions to economic inclusion and mobility were quite limited. I'd like to conclude with a call from all of us for urgent action to the urgent problems that we face. And I'd like to thank you now for your time and listening to this memorandum, and looking forward to opening up this to further discussion. I know that many of us are eager to contribute to this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Matthew Castle. May I now open the floor for discussion? Maybe we can start with Ambassador Don Campbell's remarks, or even Ambassador Suga, and then just open up the floor to the rest of the PECC members for an open discussion. Thank you.
Don Campbell, well, thank you very much, Matt, for your very comprehensive report to us. I think you've given us a great deal to think about it. You know, I think there has been progress made over the years, incremental progress made over the years in a more comprehensive and cohesive approach to some of the issues, a lot of the issues that you have raised. But I think you quite rightly point out that we tend in governments, and we even in society, we often look at these issues distinctly. And your point about the interconnectedness of COVID-19, climate change, and poverty alleviation, I think is a very valid one. And oddly enough, you know, I think that that COVID-19, which has shaken us all to the core, may, if we do this properly, may provide an opportunity for us to address these sets of issues as we move into recovery programs in a way that addresses the very big issues that you address, that you point out in terms of the defining issue of our time, which I agree is climate change, and the inequities and the poverty alleviation that we have in our society. I think a lot more work needs to be done, as you pointed out. I'm basically agreeing with you in all of this. A lot more work needs to be done as we move forward on regional trade agreement implementation, in terms of taking a much more holistic approach. I take a certain pride in the fact that the TPP became the CPTPP at Canadian insistence, comprehensive and progressive. And included in those words in comprehensive was the need to look much more at some of the social sets of issues, the environmental sets of issues, the labor rights set of issues, and the gender equality issues. Now, we haven't got that far, to be perfectly frank, in something like the TPP. I haven't looked closely enough at the RCEP. A little bit closer to my own country of Canada, these issues have now become much more prominent in the new NAFTA than they were in the old NAFTA. So we are making progress, I guess, in terms of pace of change and pace of comprehension. We're not going nearly fast enough in all of this, and I take your point very much that we need to involve the next generation, and in a way the process is a dynamic process. It's not handing from one generation to another generation the torch, as we're fond of saying, but it's really involving this so that the involvement in policy making really becomes an intergenerational activity in and of itself. Similarly, as you pointed out, the digital platform and the issue of education that you mentioned, the experience that all of you have experienced through the challenges of digital learning, are ones that need to be incorporated in a much broader way into the way that we are going to operate into the future. I have some other thoughts, but I think I should maybe stop there and give others an opportunity to speak.
Thank you, sir. May I now get any other feedback from the floor? Maybe Ed, would you like to say a few things?
Well, thank you very much. I'm extremely impressed by the memorandum that you guys have put together, and girls, in such a short space of time. I didn't know what to expect, frankly. So Matt, congratulations to all of you. I wonder if we put this forward in one of the PECC submissions to APEC, what they would make of it. It's extraordinarily challenging to think through all of this. I'm particularly thinking through how you would connect all of these different issues. It's something that I think about quite a lot. That need for policy coherence. I think that's something that's going to challenge us all moving ahead. It's incredibly important to have that policy coherence. If we don't have that coherence, I suspect that our ability to achieve what we need to do on all of the important goals will be so much harder. One of the things that I was dwelling on as I was listening to you present the memorandum was, can we move on all of these things at the same time? When we put together all of these issues, what is the priority? We have a limited amount of resources. What do you do first? When we write these statements to APEC, when we think of what do we need to do, what do you do first? And I was wondering, when the next generation was sitting down and having your discussions, did you have that discussion, Matt? What do you need to do within the next 6 months? What do you do within the next 12 months? And what is the priority over the next 24 months? And that's something I was quite curious about listening to you, because that's something that I think about quite a lot. There's so many issues that need to be dealt with. What do you do first? So that's sort of my response to the memorandum. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Richard Cantor. Thank you also. I really am impressed by what you put together in such a short period of time. And there were a lot of messages for us to take on, and I want to be able to read the document more carefully to address specific issues. I was thinking about what a message that was underneath what I heard, and it may just be something that I've been thinking about, and I heard it triggered by what you said, or it may actually be an undercurrent that you were really trying to express when you said, climate is such a big issue for your generation. Certain things are important for your generation, perhaps more than ours, and you're speaking on behalf of marginalized groups. And when you spoke about NGOs, you talked about people who were aware of issues on the ground. And at least, I don't know if it's what you meant, but what I heard, because I worry about it myself, is I say, how much in touch are people like us in PECC? If you look at the people who are here and the age profile, at least I'll speak for myself, there's a pretty big gap between us and the next generation, probably a couple of generations in between in many cases. And are we in touch? And when we speak about what's happening on the ground, are we in touch? And again, representation of marginalized groups is pretty low in institutions like PECC. So I know you all operate in educational systems where there's sometimes a student, or you have recently in your life, a student representative or different opportunities for younger generation to have an input. Sometimes as you get farther into the policy-making process, it seems much further away. And young people sometimes are more closely connected to local politics, as you mentioned local, because the entry point's easier and they feel they can have more impact. And that's one of the things I'm just taking away from this is we do need to hear your voices. I want to pay more attention to exact recommendations you made, but also think about ways of institutionalizing your voice and your generation's voice and other marginalized groups and people who know what's going on the ground and so on into what we do. Because we've talked about this backlash against globalization. In some sense, it's been going on for 40, 50 years. Different drivers, young people have said, what are these internationalists focused on? They're not focused on our problems. And so I want to keep that in my mind as one of the takeaways from your suggestions. Thanks.
Can I speak?
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Yes, first I like the memorandum very much. Maybe you want to call it manifesto, making it more exciting, perhaps. Now, I'm speaking as a person who has been through so many years of policy works. In the 1970s and 80s, I was the next gen, like you. In the 80s and 90s, I was the new gen in Thailand, in particular, in ASEAN. In 2000 onwards, I now belong to the passing gen. 2020, I think I'm a concern, belong to the concerned gen. So when I'm concerned, when I heard what you said, I appreciate it very much. Now let me share with you, I like all the things that you suggest. I just want to comment on, how to make what I have done, how to make it better during your time. Yes, I agree that we have to look at all these issues systematically. Yes, I agree that we must involve the next gen because I demanded the same thing 30, 40 years ago, exactly. Ed knew about it. I was a very strong demander of this involvement, and I got involved. I must say that I got involved. But the results that I'm seeing that I have had, not satisfactory. Maybe because of all the things that we did not good enough. We did not handle all the issues systematically, the interconnectivity, the across the board issues and so on. We were not good enough to articulate on that. But I was touched by your emphasis on the role of state because I got involved in the role of the state, as a player, critique and everything, all the way. I have come to this conclusion that we must really try to improve the role of the state. How do we do that? I say this because when the so-called next gen like you and me before got into the state, we just got, absorbed by the state. So we lost all the drive, the thing that you just said. So a lot of my friends of my generation, I thought they were so good, but when they become government, they lost their whatever so good issue. They become absorbed by the state. You want to rely on NGOs? No, not enough. Civil society? No, not enough. It's good to listen to work on NGO and civil society. Not enough. I have become more impressed with the works of what I call research institute. I think research institutes, policy research, and if they really improve on their works, if they really handle the way that they disseminate the knowledge, if they really got involved with the processes of policy formulation and so on, that would be better. How do we improve the so-called Policy Research Institute? I have come across a term called AIP, and that is Actionable Intelligent Policy. During my time, we have a lot of policies. I have found them not to be so actionable because of the limited data that we have. But now we have data. We have more and more and more data. So if we put data analytics, real data analytics into our research work, it becomes, I call, actionable intelligence policy. I take, for example, when we have data from the satellite about the forest, about the water, river, land, community, cities, and so on. If we could use all this data and translate the images provided by this data into real number. I have found in Thailand, we have KISDA, we have satellite, we have data. I have found that a lot of information we have had earlier, that we have used earlier, were not accurate because they were official statistics. But these data from satellites are real. You cannot dispute them. For example, you may say a town has population of 10,000, but the data from the satellite, show the lives of houses of 40,000. I believe the data from the satellite better than data from the government survey. So if we really use this data, and that's why I use the word intelligence. My understanding of intelligence, and this goes to what you want to work more and more about digital, and you're much better about digital work than my generation. Intelligence means data analytics, using maximum amount of data and using best hypothesis and interpret the data and come up with policy recommendation, then disseminate this policy, widely by social media, by whatever means. Then we can really get the state to be better. We have real problem with the state. I don't know, I don't blame other states, but I can say that we have real problem with the state in Thailand. And everyone acknowledges it, except people in the state. So, thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I now invite the next gen, anybody who would like to share their thoughts with the PECC members? Please unmute yourself and go ahead with your intervention. Don't be shy. I know you have many good ideas. We were talking very actively before. So other than Matthew, could I invite someone from the next gen to present their thoughts? Yes, Mr. Espinoza, the floor is yours.
Very much. I think I speak on behalf of my colleagues when I say that I'm very happy and we are very happy to share this forum with all you. And I think that most of our thoughts and the results of our discussions are very well expressed in the memorandum that Matthew just read. But I would also like to share and what I think it's something very important for the purposes of PECC and for the purposes of this general meeting and the discussion, and what Mr. Cantor was speaking before, because I think that it's very important that these intergenerational discussions and debates take place in order to better cope with the challenges that our region and our institutions and our societies are facing. So I think that the conclusions that we can achieve here are deeper, are stronger if we all can express it in such an intergenerational form like this.
Okay, thank you so much. Can I invite Ms. Tong to have her say, please? Thanks.
Right. So thank you very much. Sorry. Thank you, everyone. I think I think all of the feedbacks are quite fair, and I think those are addressed by our discussions. So my name is Melissa. I'm from Hong Kong. So I had a really quick follow-up question, if time allows, after everyone speak, is that you guys kind of mentioned that different governments have priorities. That's certainly true. And also I realized that as some panels mentioned, there are diversities in different economies. So I'm just trying to understand from your perspective, after years of engagement in this platform, when we are trying to deal with priorities within economies, and when we bring it to the international levels, certainly there will be conflicts between the discussion between economies. Like, for example, in country A or economy A, they have this priority in place, and another economy, they have another priority. So when it comes to reaching agreements, how do you see different economies coming together, or how do we solve the conflicts between the priority issues that are faced by different economies? So this is just something that I'm hoping to see if time allows. Thank you.
Thank you. That is a very important and interesting question indeed. Can I invite Rose, Miss Sonia Rose, to take the floor?
Thank you. And I echo what Delegate Tong and Delegate Esperanza have said about thanking you for the platform. And thank you to Matt for summarizing everything that we have discussed. My question is very related to Melissa. My name is Sonia. I'm also from New Zealand. In terms of priorities, I'd be interested to hear the committee members' thoughts on a values or principles-based way of coordinating different policies in a succinct way. For example, the key issues of our generation, I would say, are climate change, inequality, and equity. So if improving those three things were to be the guiding principles of one economy, many economies, and that is a way to equally guide every single policy decision, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on how potentially successful that may be, or if that's been tried in the past. Thank you.
Thank you. May I now invite a representative or a speaker from the PECC side to address the questions that were being posed. Yes, sir.
May I speak? Yes. Well, I won't directly address the questions raised, but I probably will in the course of my intervention. Firstly, I want to thank the Next Gen group for such an impressive presentation, and I'm impressed with the quality of their discussion. Certainly, there's no disagreement about the issues that you have raised. I just wanted to pick up on two of them. One on climate change. I agree that this is a defining issue, an existential issue, and that everything that we do moving forward in the region, when it comes to trade, investments, digital technology, connectivity, etc., should be looked at from the prism of climate change, sustainability, and resilience. I think you raised the issue, and I think Richard also raised the issue about how do you operationalize these principles or values moving forward. The second point is on the role of NGOs and civil society in helping shape policy. And you, next generation, are more familiar with the use of the social media, which can be a force for good, but can also be a force for the bad. And it looks to me like at the present, it's the bad that's has the upper side of it in terms of the kind of misinformation that's coming out. Case in point, of course, would be the COVID-19 vaccine. So I'd like to know your views on how do we address this particular issue. General point about how do in APEC economies agree on policy issues, and I think you pointed it out. There's agreement on the basic principles that that should guide APEC as it moves forward. So you mentioned inclusion, sustainability, innovation, among others. So that always comes into play whenever any policy issues are taken up. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Would anyone else like to add on or answer the questions that was posed by the next gen? You may unmute yourself.
Hi, good morning. Harizal from ISIS Malaysia, PECC. I was impressed, like everyone else, with the the suggestions and thinking that was presented essentially by the next generation. But I also had the opportunity to sort of like join a little bit, listening to your conversations, leading to the statement that you presented to us earlier. I was just wondering whether if you would be interested to think about how to get organized and really make some of the suggestions and concerns to have real sort of like traction in your own countries that would possibly have impact to the respective governments on how they would react to the to the details of their policy making. So I didn't hear a lot about the how I mean, this is the most difficult part. Right? We can think about the problems and we can think about what is needed. But really, I think in my experience is that the most difficult part is to really get organized and think about strategies on how to push this forward and to get sort of like some traction, like I said. And you are representative of many different countries here, right? And I'm pretty sure that in your activities or how you're connected or how you operate in your own country would probably have some, you might have some ideas on how to push this forward. And I was wondering whether if you would want to organize yourselves and look at some of these issues. You mentioned trade, you mentioned taxation, you mentioned climate change. These are all very, very big and important issues. Maybe you want to take up, certain countries want to take up certain issues, so maybe you want to take all up. I don't know. But it's really, how do you get organized beyond putting this down on a piece of paper and getting it really across, with your own governments. That's my thought. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for that suggestion. Yes, Dr. Naronchai.
I'd like to respond to the question raised by Hong Kong. Yes, APEC, we had experience about getting policies adopted. Of course, earlier on, policies adopted were easier, perhaps compared with policies today. At that time, in the 1990s and early 2000s, policies adopted were about trade liberalization and investment facilitation by means of regional cooperation. Everybody agree on that one because we had policy research to support them. To say that by doing so, it would be good for all the countries involved. So I think for the next gen, the next common issue, as obvious to all of us now, is about climate change and sustainability. I think that the research institutes, universities included, working on this. If they can do this and come up with what I call the actionable intelligence policies and feed them into government like we did in the 90s and early 2000s, that would be effective. I'm sure that these are common issues faced by all the APEC member countries, and they need cooperation in order to manage these issues. So please improve your research work, and please get connected to the policy people, and I'm sure that they will make use of it. You know, I can say that Thailand, we are going to host APEC for 2022. I heard the day before that New Zealand hosting 2020, they call it the year of uncertainty. We are calling it 2022, the year of recovery. So in that recovery, we are looking for common issues that should be addressed at APEC and then should be applied together in APEC country to make all these policies more effective. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for that suggestion. We have a raised hand from our next gen. Kim, would you like to, yes.
Oh, hi. And just before I begin my comment, I too would like to thank the PECC for allowing us to be present and to participate in these kinds of meaningful dialogues. And I wanted to make a comment in response to what Mr. Hazri has said about organizing. And I think that that also relates to Mr. Kantor's suggestion about institutionalizing this kind of youth input. And from the next generation perspective, as somebody who's working in policy as a young professional, this is a really exciting opportunity. And I'm sure that there would be a lot of, individuals like ourselves who are willing to put in the time and effort in order to make that work. But at the same time, we have so many interesting transnational youth organizations popping up, like some branches from the United Nations bodies or the World Economic Forum's Global Shapers, the Young China Watchers. We have a lot of those, and what makes or breaks these organizations is the commitment and funding and support from the bodies that are trying to get that youth input, because obviously this is a tremendous opportunity for young people like ourselves to contribute and to build our career. But also maybe this is I'm beating a dead horse, but we have a lot of things to deal with in terms of managing paying off our student loans or dealing with a housing market that's incredibly challenging to deal with, and this is extra work. And as much as I would like to say that I'm a passionate person and that I would be willing to volunteer to do certain things, passion alone only takes us so far. And if we wanted to see something more tangible coming out of this institutionalized form of youth commitment, then there has to be, I think there has to be a very strong, tangible guidance and commitment, actual support to the youth group. So that was my comment.
Okay, thank you, sir. May I invite anyone from the PECC member side to share their thoughts on the feedback from the next gen? You can unmute yourself.
Oh, thank you very much. I am Sergio Ley from Mexico, chair of PECC Mexico. I just want to add, I can agree to, and I join the congratulations made to the memorandum. It is a wonderful piece of work. I think this is a very thoughtful, and it is very enlightening to us because it's a good look at the young generation that will take the torch after we leave these duties that we are taking right now. But I think I want to make a comment to some what had been said over here, and it is that one of the most successful factors that made, for instance, ASEAN to succeed during those years, and then to get to a free trade agreement at 2020 was that the engagement to all economies independently of the political system that they used to have. And I think that it is also something that APEC has done very successfully. And I think that to get into issues of internal political situations within each one of the economies that integrate APEC or PECC members will be a little bit, bumpy, to say it very softly. But and then I think that if we continue with the path of going and not getting into political systems or these political discussions of systems, we are better engaged on achieving our goals that have been immediate. I think that the issues of course, climate change and the issues of fighting poverty, it is universal. This is not, it has nothing to do with political systems, but and also with trade, that they do not depend on political systems. And I think that we keep on that path, we will be successful in many issues as we have been up to this moment, achieving our goals. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your input. Is there anyone else who would like to address the questions posed by the Next Gen?
Yes, I would like to ask, actually I'd like to ask the Next Gen delegates a question, if I may.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
I hope that one of the outputs from your session will be the establishment of some networks that will be useful to you in your work going forward. When we talked a little bit about track 2 at the beginning, that was one of the key takeaways in terms of establishing a safe space for discussion and to be able to have these offline discussions and be able to form these sort of linkages. I mean, along with everybody else, I think these are insightful comments. We've talked a little bit about how you move these issues forward across a very disparate group of economies. One way, of course, is to maintain those linkages, to cross-fertilize in terms of ideas and so forth. And it may be premature to ask the question, but I guess it's more of a hope than a question that out of this will come some useful contacts of networks, maybe not all, however many there were, 25 or 30 participants, but among some of them. So you don't have to respond now, but all I would like to just sort of leave a marker, leave a hope that this has been provided a platform, a facilitation to establish some linkages amongst people of your generation, cross-fertilization of ideas amongst yourself, and that those networks will be helpful in future in bringing those ideas forward, not only today, but in future sessions of PECC and feeding into the policy-making apparatus in our various economies. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. In the interest of time, can I invite a representative from the Next Gen? It could be Matthew, it could be someone else, to say the last few words so that we can move on to the next session. So this is your time, Next Gen, to have your say. Anybody from Next Gen? Maybe Matthew?
Thank you. I'm happy to say a few words in response. I think I speak for all of us when I say thank you very much for your very considered engagement with our memorandum and for the opportunity to present it to you. I think that coming across in all of your comments are, on the one hand, certainly a call to action and a prompt to not leave this as words on the page, but to consider how we can move forward in advancing some of the issues that we have identified here. I can only speak for myself when I say that I think that the connections that we've made as part of this week's sessions have been really valuable and are something that I think many of us will take forward in our work. So I won't revisit any of the points from today, but please just let me say thank you again for the chance to present this to you.
Thank you so much, Matthew, and the rest of the Next Gen delegation. Thank you so much again for your active discussion before, and also with the sharing of your thoughts. I will now like to pass the floor to the co-chairs of the PECC Standing Committee so that the next meeting can take place. And before that, I would need to ask the Next Gen to leave the space. But again, this is not goodbye. We're all connected through the LinkedIn account. And I hope that we can continue our discussions even after the meeting has ended today. Thank you all and have a great day.